Good evening, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. I hope you're all doing very well tonight. So, couple things before we get into yet another Golgari gameplay video. First of all, this will be my first video on the channel where I am omitting the sideboard tech. Even in matches where I've already played the matchup before, I will at least link to the old sideboard tech and maybe discuss how our updated list looks if it was an older list that we used. For this one and potentially going forward, depending on feedback, I'm going to be leaving out the sideboard techs for reasons that will be more fully explained in my forthcoming video, the forthcoming channel update. Now, nothing I do in this channel is set in stone, so if everybody really loves the sideboard stuff, I'm more than happy to bring it back, but my hunch is that it's the slowest part of the video and perhaps the least interesting for the average player, even though I know a lot of people probably really like how in-depth we get. But sideboarding, we're going to leave it out for now and see how things go. The second thing I'd like to quickly say is thank you so much to my newest patron, Dan. Dan is our newest patron, very generous buddy. Thank you so much. It means a lot to me. Really appreciate that. And new Patreon updates will also be forthcoming in the channel update video. As of right now, I've just kind of said, hey, here's my Patreon. If you'd like to support the channel, here's how you do it, and we'll figure out the rest later. I am going to be, hopefully tonight, should be tomorrow at the latest, publishing my tiered reward lists and, basically laying out the incentives that might spur further interest in supporting the channel beyond just getting some good, consistent Golgari content out there. So stay tuned for that. So with that out of the way, let's play some Golgari. Now, our hand is functional but very threat dense. 4 creatures in an opening 7 is an extremely high amount of threats for a deck like this. And of course, 2 of them are Tarmogoyf, which, while it is our premier threat, it really needs a lot of interaction around it on average to make it grow. And we lack that to a pretty significant degree. That said, the hand does function. The land is nice and painless, and we've got both colors in abundance. We've certainly got a lot of value over the course of a game, but we're leaning pretty heavily on Maelstrom Pulse right now. So I think in a blind game 1, because we don't really know what we're mulling toward anyway, we don't really know what we need, I'm very generous with my keeps in game 1. If the hand functions, I'll usually keep it. So I think that applies here, even though I'm not very optimistic about this hand. And our opponent is keeping 7 as well, and they're going to open up on the Leyline of Sanctity. Well, I guess I'm glad I didn't mulligan to a hand with a bunch of discard and think that was going to be good, because it's not. And sure enough, we are against Bogles, which is probably the most likely deck in Modern to main deck Leylines. And so, Bogles, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. I'm probably going to vacillate arbitrarily between the 2 pronunciations, so forgive me. But however you want to call it, this is a deck filled with maybe 8 to 11 or so of these hexproof creatures, and they tend to stack a bunch of powerful enchantments on them and, do their best to just uninteractively race. They do have a couple pieces of interaction. They do have some Path to Exiles in there usually, and, maybe more from the side, but that's basically the entire game plan of Bogles. Now, of course, our spot removal gets hosed pretty hard by hexproof, but we do at least have cards like Maelstrom Pulse that can attack their enchantments. So I'm certainly not any more optimistic about my hand, having seen what we're up against, and drawing another Scavenging Ooze is roughly the last thing I wanted to see. But we at least have some bodies to play. We can at least buy some time, and we do know that this Maelstrom Pulse will be good. Alright, our opponent plays a Core Spirit Dancer, which is one of the few creatures in their 75 that is not hexproof, but of course this is a card advantage machine, and, serves as a higher risk but potentially higher reward target for all of their auras as well. So, turn 2's Core Spirit Dancer on the play from our opponent is actually quite bad for us. We would love to draw a piece of removal for that right off the top here, that is for sure. Wow, okay. Fatal Push right off the top, you can't really ask for more than that. So, notice that the Core Spirit Dancer's ability is a cast trigger. So whenever you cast an aura spell, you may draw a card. Now, in some cases, some pilots might have been tempted to say, well, let's see if they target her with the aura, then we get to push her in response, and that's a nice little 2-for-1. Well, A, it's not really a 2-for-1 because they still get the cast trigger, they still get to draw a card. And B, that is very, very bad if they choose to enchant the Hexproof creature instead, which they should identify they're against a BGX deck, and that's what they should do. So we are not going to mess around, we're just going to push her. Very thankful to have drawn that. And now, all of a sudden, our Tarmogoyfs are a reasonable size. So, while I'm still not confident or anything, we still need to hit a lot of good draws here. That Fatal Push was kind of the minimum of what we needed to be in this game. So, they get a +1/+1 in reach with Totem Armor, and +1/+0 in flying that can be bought back. So neither of those are particularly scary on their own, and they just hit us for 3. And they're down to 1 card in hand already, so, this could be worse. And we hit our 3rd land drop, that's a Treetop Village. Alright, that's actually pretty good, because we're not thrilled to Maelstrom Pulse either of these auras. We want to maybe wait for a higher priority target, or we maybe want to wait to pulse the Leyline if we draw Liliana of the Veil so we can Edict them. Because remember, Liliana targets a player. So Liliana's Edict and her ultimate are shut off by Leyline of Sanctity, but otherwise Lily is one of the best cards in the matchup. So even if we drew an untapped land there, we probably would have played a Tarmogoyf and Pest. So the fact that we got a Treetop Village, yeah, that's a pretty good draw. So let's see what the opponent has here. Okay, they have a land, which is not good for them, especially because it's not a Horizon Canopy or a Dryad Arbor or anything like that, and their best card, basically, which is very good for them, obviously. That's a Daybreak Coronet, so this is a really important one to know about, because notice enchant creature with another aura attached to it. So a classic line that we can take is, if they're loading up on a Core Spirit Dancer or something, or even if they're not, if they're loading up on a Bogle, they have only one other aura on it, and they cast the Coronet, you can Abrupt Decay or Assassin's Trophy the enchantment in response, or kill it with a Golgari Charm if that's in post side, and then that is a nice 2-for-1. So definitely important to know that aspect of this card, and also, the stats and abilities it gives are just insane. That's like the card that pushes this deck over the top. And, yep, so it's a 6/5 with all the keywords in the world hitting us, and all of a sudden that's a 12-point life swing. Yeah, seems pretty good. Fortunately, we do have this Maelstrom Pulse, and all we can really do here is pulse away the Coronet. And, our Tarmogoyf is huge. It's a 5/6, bigger than their Bogle by far now, but of course it still has flying, so we cannot play defense. All we can do is come across for 5, and because of that turn of life gain, they're only on a 5-turn clock, but they drew a land off the top, which is really nice for us. Hit us for 3, and then we'll pass. We draw another land as well. So, what are our options here? We could play Tireless Tracker into Swamp. We could also have a 2-spell turn with probably Tarmogoyf plus another card, whether it be a Scavenging Ooze or just draining them for 2 with Collective Brutality. None of the other lines are particularly exciting. I don't think it's time to fire up Treetop Village yet, not when we have all these spells in hand that develop our board. We certainly don't want to start eating anything with the Skoos, because that's going to shrink our Tarmogoyfs at the moment. So yeah, I think it's either Tracker into land or a double spell turn, and I think the double spell turn is clearly better here, right? So I'd rather just deploy the Ooze. We're just... we're unlikely to beat if they have another Daybreak Coronet off the top or something else really, really good like that, we're unlikely to beat it anyway, even if we took this turn to drain them for 2 to get a little bit of a life buffer with Brutality. So I like just playing out a couple creatures here. Even if this ooze is only a Grizzly Bear, it still adds to the clock. And look, this is something that our opponent might not realize. 5, 10, 12, 15. We have lethal on board. It doesn't seem like it. They were at 25 like a turn ago, and we just played out most of this stuff. But all of a sudden, we're just kind of threatening lethal, and our poor opponent bricks again, so they have been flooded pretty hard. But I don't think they even did the math and looked at the board, because it doesn't seem like we should have lethal. It doesn't look like we should have lethal, but we have lethal. It's pretty cool. These gigantic Tarmogoyfs plus a Treetop Village can really just end the game out of nowhere. And we draw a Fatal Push, but it really doesn't matter what we drew, because we're just going to fire up the Treetop and move to attacks, and our opponents, they realize. And maybe they did realize, and maybe they're hoping we didn't see it. But regardless, we had exactly lethal on board, and that was kind of dodging a bullet, because their start was really strong. We got really lucky to top deck a Fatal Push right on time to answer their Core Spirit Dancer before they could get a ton of value out of stacking this thing with auras. And then we were able to answer the Daybreak Coronet and then just outrace the less impressive auras. And of course we needed our opponent probably to flood a little bit there too. If they had found a little bit more gas off the top, it might not have gone so well. So Bogles is a deck that really likes to win game ones, and really often wins game ones, because it operates on an axis that is so powerful against so much of Modern's interaction, and against the decks that don't interact and like to race it, well, again, you have, these cards like Daybreak Coronet that are hugely swingy, that really, can put the game out of reach for aggro decks if you connect once or twice with a stacked up Coronet wearing Bogle. So the fact, in addition to all that, our deck, of course, is a deck that is not necessarily favored in all that many game ones, and we really get a lot better against most decks post-side than we start off in game one. So the fact that we can sneak a game one away from Bogles, yeah, that's pretty good. That's definitely good for us. So anyway, the power of Tarmogoyf, assist from the Treetop Village and the Skoos. Nothing wrong with that. Also, of course, the power of Maelstrom Pulse. That was, the fact that our deck packs so many main deck, strong across the meta answers to non-creature permanents, in this case enchantments, continues to be one of my absolute favorite aspects of playing Golgari. So, anyway, that was sweet to steal game one. Now let's go to game two, see how it goes. Alright, my friends, game two on the draw against Bogles. We snuck a win game one, and now we are on the draw, and we are post-side. And even though it has a lot less gas than our hand in game one, I actually like our hand here better. So, again, the density of threats that we had in game one was just way too high relative to the interaction we needed or wanted to see. And it was just so awkward. We were never going to leverage all of our threats efficiently, if at all. Here, we don't have that problem. We have only one threat, and that one threat can realistically do a lot of work toward taking over the game. More importantly, we have two really valuable pieces of interaction. We have Abrupt Decay, which is just a perfect card in the matchup. It can kill the Core Spirit Dancer. It can kill any of their auras. It can kill some other sideboard cards that we might not necessarily expect. The only thing it cannot kill is Leyline of Sanctity, and that's unfortunate, but right now, the Leyline isn't accomplishing anything against our hand anyway, so Abrupt Decay is a very valuable card. So, of course, is Engineered Explosives. This, set on one, of course, is usually how you'll want to use it, and man oh man is that powerful. It's a way to kill Bogles, and it is usually going to take a great many auras with it. It's just a matter of, how many hits can you afford to take, and how much can you allow them to play into this, making it really, really good, 3 for 1, 4 for 1, before you take too many hits, or you indeed risk getting killed. So you don't want to expose this too early. This is definitely a matchup where it's realistic to make this a good solid 2-for-1 or 3-for-1. But you also don't want to get too greedy with it, right? Because like a good clean 3-for-1 that you only invest 3 mana into is enough to often bury, any opponent, especially an opponent on a deck like Bogles, where they do kind of need a critical mass of cards, and they do also mulligan a lot, sometimes anyway. Our land base is fine, Hissing Quagmire is actually potentially really nice with Death Touch, depending on what auras they have, of course, but this can be a good defender against a big Boggle, and we've got enough lands to operate, so I'm a fan of this hand, and our opponent's keeping 7 again, but they do not have a Leyline this time, so that'll be interesting if we find some Discard or Liliana of the Veil, both of which are very, very good in the matchup. They start off with a Slippery Bogle, and we rip a Thoughtseize off the top. Well, that's just beautiful, because playing a Hissing Quagmire there is not bad. I don't think I would have the courage to play out an Engineered Explosives quite yet, just on the chance they brought in some kind of disenchant style effect. But especially now that we have the Thoughtseize, that's just clearly the play to lead on. So they have a second land, and this is a really nice hand, They kept a Bogle. That's all they really need is just 1. 2 lands, and 4 auras, including their best one. So we saw this in Game 1. We did not see this, but this is just kind of a correlate to this. Instead of reach, it gives first strike, but otherwise +1/+1 and totem armor. And then ethereal armor. +1/+1 for each enchantment you control that has first strike. So this card is actually quite powerful in the deck too. So what do we take? Well, I think we pretty clearly take the Daybreak Coronet for a couple of reasons. Number 1, it is the most powerful card in their hand. Number 2, it's the only thing that doesn't cost 1 mana. It's the only thing that's not CMC 1. So right now, we're poised for a nice healthy 4-for-1 or more with our EE, but it's going to depend again on whether we can afford to let them play all that stuff out, because it's a little bit more awkward on the draw, right? Because we still can't EE next turn, and they could get pretty big pretty quick. They found another ethereal armor. That actually is a little bit scary, because now that's just a 5/5. So yeah, they're gonna crack in for 5. Now, can you imagine if we didn't have this Engineered Explosives, we'd be in a lot more trouble. Wow, what a bomb. Liliana of the Veil. That's a heck of a draw. So what do we do here? Well, we could do a few things. We could play Hissing Quagmire, and then we could play Engineered Explosives on 1. That way, even if they have a disenchant effect, next turn we can just go land into Lily, Edict them, and then we've still taken care of the Bogle. That's a good play. That's a reasonable play. Another play is to just say we're going to play a land and pass and let them extend even further. Next turn we're going to get them either with the Lily or with the EE. Depends kind of on what else they do. And then we'll still have whichever one we didn't play in hand as an answer. That's the safer line. And so I think that's what I would like to do here, but the absolute safest line is to still play a land and pass, but instead of taking the chance to deploy our Quagmire, we play a Forest. That lets us hold up Abrupt Decay unless they do something really crazy next turn, and we just need to answer that to stay alive. Or, who knows? Who knows? This is just the absolute safest line, and given the power of whatever we're going to do on turn 3, one of these is going to be a huge blowout. I think we're okay to take the minor tempo hit of not getting a chance to play our Quagmire. And they have a Daybreak Coronet. Again, they found another one, so I am very, very happy that I kept this Abrupt Decay around. We're going to decay this thing in the beginning of combat. It's just the correct play, because it takes away Vigilance. Not that that matters, but it's just good practice. You want to hit that before they get before they move to their attack step and remain vigilant with their attack, but yeah, that was huge. That was absolutely huge. Now we draw Fatal Push. We leave some number of these in because we need to be able to hit the Core Spirit Dancer, but not too many, right? So that's not a very good draw, but that's alright. We're going to go ahead and fetch, and we're already down to 7. Very glad we're able to answer that Coronet. And here, I think the play is Liliana, because we can Edict and we can have her around still ticking up afterwards. You know, if we can just tick her up one more time, then she's poised to Edict again, and that's just very hard for them to beat. So they go ahead and fetch, and then they're just going to scoop it up. Fair enough. Looked like they were, they still had these 2 Umbras in hand, and, not much else. So granted, they could have played it out, but what are they going to do? We're going to take Lily up next turn. They're going to pitch an Umbra, and then even if we don't want to run ourselves out of resources anymore, we can just leave her at 2. The next time they find a Bogle, they're going to get it edicted away, and then they have to find a 3rd Bogle, and they do not have a very high threat density. They're kind of like us in that respect, or like a Death Shadow deck, kind of, where their threats are so powerful. In the case of our deck and of Shadow, kind of more naturally as a consequence of the game proceeding. In their case, it kind of is a consequence of stacking them up with all these auras, that they don't want a huge threat density, right? So this type of edict effect is extremely backbreaking, and it proved to be the case here. They didn't even want to play it out any further. They just scooped it up. And of course, we had everything, right? So next turn, we'll take up the Lily. If we drew a card we like, we can pitch this Fatal Push. We'll play our Skoos, we'll play our Hissing Quagmire. Skoos is going to start putting a clock on, maybe buffer our life total a little bit. And then we've still got Liliana and EE waiting in the wings, and we're probably better at top decking than they are. I think that's pretty clear once they've been this heavily put behind on resources anyway. So, yeah, this was a kind of a quick and dirty one, and Bogles is a tough matchup. Of course, the whole nature of the deck is to stymie interaction, and we are a heavily interactive deck. But this game shows that our interaction can still be very, very good. They kept really good 7s both times. They led on the Leyline game 1. In game 2, they had kind of the ideal proportion of 1 Bogle, 2 lands, and 4 auras in their opening hand, including a Daybreak Coronet, and they found another Daybreak Coronet in the first couple draw steps. So, their draws and their progressions were really, really good. But so were ours. We found the answers we needed game 1. In game 2, what we had going on in our opening hand was frankly really quite nice. And then this Liliana was just darn near unbeatable if they didn't have a Leyline, which they did not. So anyway, even a deck that kind of thrives on blunting or totally shutting off interaction like Bogles, we can still beat them, and we can still beat them pretty comprehensively. So good games well played to the opponent. Not sure they could have really done anything differently. We just had the stuff we needed at the right times, and, I don't care what anybody says. You can still play a fair deck in Modern. You can still play an interactive deck, and you can thrive. We have the tools to do it, especially post-trophy. There's nothing that we can't really cover our bases on. You just have to know what you need, when you need it. You have to know the metagame. You have to know how to sideboard, and you have to, of course, your deck has to comply with you as well. But that is true for any Modern deck. So anyway, all stars of this matchup were Tarmogoyf and Liliana, and our non-creature removal spells. All very, very good, and we took down the Bogles. So thank you all, as always, so much for watching. Like I said at the beginning of the video, keep your eyes on the channel, please, and I'll have an update coming maybe later tonight, maybe tomorrow, exploring some of the changes to the channel, including some new incentives to join Patreon and support the content. So until then, I hope you all have a great night, and I will see you for the next video.